Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Harry.
I'm Zara.
Yesterday, the approved list of NDIS support services came into effect. Wheelchairs, railings at home, and hearing aids are among the supports that got the tick. But the government's list has removed some supports, including alternative therapies, sex services, and gym memberships. The list dropped 2 days before it came into effect, raising concerns from disability advocates that it didn't provide them enough time to adjust to the new rules. In today's deep dive, we'll look at how and why the NDIS is changing.
Harry, I think that sometimes in the news we can use acronyms very often that sometimes don't get explained as such and are used as this kind of assumed knowledge. So to start us off for this deep dive, can you just explain what actually is the NDIS?
So it's the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and I think most people would associate it with two things. So it's people with disability and money. But to recap, the NDIS is a scheme helping to support people with disabilities to live as independently as possible. It's set up for people 9 to 65 years old, and they are given a budget to spend on the things that they need. So that includes things like hearing aids, wheelchairs, or railings to be installed in your house. Australia is quite advanced in terms of this funding model because it's entirely government funded. And when it was first hatched and brought into existence in 2013 under the then Gillard government, they would use words like world-leading, pioneering support for people with disabilities.
Okay, and so this scheme's been in existence since 2013, but we're talking about it today because some things have changed, right?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that the NDIS isn't cheap. It is a very costly program. So in the last year, the government spent $44.6 billion on the scheme. And it was the fastest growing expenditure out of all the government's spending categories. And the only thing that topped it was its interest repayments, which is a whole other separate economic category. Now, the majority of the funding in the NDIS goes towards the NDIS plans for each individual participant. So that's 42 out of the $44.6 billion that we're talking about. The question of the scheme's viability financially has been something that both sides of politics have long grappled with, both Labor and the coalition. And there is a bit of blame shifting about why the scheme has blown out. The government passed legislation under the title Getting the NDIS Back on Track earlier this year.
So that was their attempt to try and cut those costs that you said have blown out so much.
That's right. And they wanted to introduce ways to just rein in a bit of the spending associated with the NDIS. The government said the reforms that they were introducing would save about $14.4 billion over the next 4 years.
What were the type of reforms we're talking about here?
So that's the kind of support services that someone on an NDIS plan can claim. So that's why we're talking about it this week, because we found out what is categorised as an approved support service and what is not.
Harry, for people that might not be on the NDIS themselves or know someone on the NDIS, can you just talk us through what sort of services are we talking about? What can people claim as part of the NDIS?
So there's a pretty comprehensive list that's meant to act like kind of a set of guardrails about what you can claim on the scheme. So that includes things like a guide animal, hearing and vision aids. There's some broader categories, so a home modification, so if you need a rail or if you need an access ramp, or you might need to make adjustments to your car, so that would include installing a hoist or modifying your seat. And also things to help you physically move around, so mobility scooters, wheelchairs, walkers, those kinds of things are what's been categorised as approved NDIS support services. There was a bit of commentary through the year about whether menstrual products would be part of an approved support service.
That's because the government published a draft list that said that they weren't included, those menstrual products.
That's right.
Yeah.
And now they've walked back on that and they have included menstrual products. So that's things like applicators and period underwear.
Okay, so Harry, just to recap here, we're saying the government wants to bring down its spending on the NDIS, and the government of the day, the Labor government, has identified that one way they can do that is to more carefully define what supports someone on the NDIS can access using that money versus what they can't. So you've run through a bit of a list of what they can, but I think a lot more of the media attention has been now on what people on the NDIS cannot access. Take me through some of the things that we now understand cannot be accessed using NDIS funds.
So the list of things that you can't access is also quite comprehensive. And as I mentioned about the guardrails, these are the things that exist outside those guardrails.
Yeah.
And the government went to some length to define what won't be approved. And that's not to say that all these things that I'm about to talk through have been claimed in the past. Some of them have, but Bill Shorten, the NDIS minister, has said that not all of these things have been claimed previously. So day-to-day expenses for things like rent, food, internet, gym memberships, they won't be covered under the NDIS. Surrogacy and fertility treatments aren't classified as an NDIS expense either. Then the government listed a range of what it described as alternative therapies that can't be claimed. So crystal, cuddle, yoga, wilderness, and sound therapies are all out. And frequency healing, Reiki, deep energy cleansing, no tarot card reading either. The NDIS also won't cover what the government terms wellness and coaching. So that's areas that it says aren't based in evidence. So that's life coaches, hypnotherapy, career advisors.
One of the things that has been spoken about a lot was sex services. Which category have they fallen into?
They're not an approved NDIS support service. The government has also given a bit of a grace period. So over the next year, if someone accidentally claims something that isn't covered by the NDIS, that will be flagged and they won't necessarily get in trouble. Sex services, alcohol, and illegal drugs are the only exception to that. You can't claim that. And if you are flagged, you could face a bit of trouble. It's not so clear what that would be just yet, but the government was definitely quite clear that you can't try and claim any of those things.
Okay, so those new rules came into effect yesterday, but we only got those lists this week as well. You know, there's been lots of speculation about what would be on them, what wouldn't be on them, but the government only actually published them earlier this week.
The disability community had 2 days to really comb through everything that has been either categorised as approved or not approved. And it's fair to say that some of the advocacy groups were not only concerned about it, they weren't happy about it at all. The deadline had been approaching for some time, so we knew that October 3rd was the date that the new support services list would come into effect, but we didn't know what was officially going to be on that list until 2 days before that. We've heard from a number of organisations now who said they're quite concerned, so the Disability Advocacy Network Australia and People with Disability Australia, who said there just wasn't nearly enough time to fully adjust to the new rules. And those groups had been asking the government to give what they termed reasonable notice about what was changing. And they're basically saying that 2 days is really pushing the friendship.
But just to clarify here, there's not 2 days in which this changes forever. There is that grace period that the government has outlined.
That's right. So if you are an NDIS participant and you claim something under $1,500 and you weren't meant to claim that thing, the agency overseeing the NDIS would flag that and you would then just be told you can't claim that. And there wouldn't be necessarily any punishment. So that's their way of sort of transitioning into this new support system.
Okay, but there still is this criticism that remains from, as you mentioned, these advocacy groups. How has the government responded to that criticism?
So the NDIS Minister, Bill Shorten, has said that nobody would lose their NDIS funding to help manage their disabilities for the things that they need. He also said that this list is pretty much a continuation of the status quo, that these are things that are currently being claimed and that the vast majority of cases won't be affected by setting out these approval lists. But President of People with Disability Australia, Marieke Jonkers, said the combination of the narrow time frame and some possible confusion about the changes coming into effect mean that some people could go without critical supports that they do need. So it's going to be a really big test for the government and the agency overseeing the NDIS, who is implementing these changes, and whether people with disabilities are going to still get the right level of support that they need.
Harry, this is a scheme that involves some 600,000 people in this country. As you said, the costs associated with it have been something that both political parties have really grappled with. So understanding how these changes affect, the communities and the people who need them and who rely on them, but also understanding whether that will make a difference then to the government's budget. It's certainly something that we'll be keeping an eye on. Thank you for explaining that story to us today, and thank you for tuning into another week of The Daily Aus. If you are listening on Apple or Spotify, we would love you to hit follow. It sends a signal to the platforms that you like what we're doing. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can hit subscribe and never miss another video. We'll be back again on Monday, but until then, have a fabulous weekend.